Welcome to Chapter 17, Death, Dying, and Grieving. In this chapter, we will deal with the following topics: defining death and life, defining death and life and death issues, facing one's own death, and coping with the death of someone else. So this first section will be about issues in determining death, and we will cover these particular issues, and we'll look at decisions regarding life, death, and health care. So, what are the issues in determining death? Well, 25 years ago, it was simpler to determine death than it is today. It was considered the end of certain biological functions, such as breathing. Your breathing stops, you're dead. Your blood pressure, stops, means you're dead. Or your body gets rigid and rigor mortis sets in. Oh, that's a clear sign of death. So we looked for clear physical signs of death in order to define when somebody had died. Now we take into consideration the possibility of brain death. When all electrical activity of the brain has ceased for a period of time, we now consider that a neurological definition of death. And we have the means to, check and see if there is any electrical activity in the brain. One sign, for instance, would be if we do an EEG, an electroencephalograph, and we get a flat line reading for a period of time, this would tell us that there is no electrical activity in the brain, and we could declare this person brain dead. Brain death includes both the higher cortical functions and the lower brainstem functions, according to current definitions of brain death. The higher portions of the brain often die sooner, though, than the lower portions. The higher portions are kind of where the higher portions include the main cerebral cortex, including our frontal lobe and our prefrontal cortex, and really all of our thinking and consciousness and memories. The lower brainstem, tends to do more basic living functions such as breathing, temperature regulation, heartbeat, etc. So there are some, because there's a different timing and when these two areas die, the higher versus the lower brain areas, some have suggested that we should adopt what's called a cortical death policy. If adopted, then physicians could claim a person is dead when his or her higher brain is no longer functioning. That is, there's no longer any cortical function. The cerebral cortex has stopped. Even if the lower brainstem is still functioning. And so there has been a push by some physicians and to adopt this policy. It would, make it more clear on when we could call somebody dead when they are in a vegetative state. The lower brainstem can sometimes be kept functioning for years, so the person will continue to breathe and will continue to have a heartbeat, even though there may be no activity at all in the cerebral cortex, in the higher portion of the brain. So this person would not be capable of thought, would not be capable of memory, or of ever doing any conscious behaviors or actions. They're simply existing if it's only the lower brain function that's active. So this has been a debate, and it certainly is um, a contentious kind of issue for some. Some people are of the opinion that if a person is still showing biological functions, that by all means we should keep them alive as long as possible, and who knows what kind of miracle may happen. So if I'm breathing and my heart's beating, keep me alive idea. Whereas once again, a lot of more modern physicians are saying that if your higher brain functions are finished, you will no longer ever have any characteristics of a typical human. One thing that can help kind of with the decision of anyone that might end up in that condition of being in a vegetative state where they're only being kept alive, being where only their basic functions are being kept alive. One thing that could help with that is advanced care planning. And this is the process of a patient thinking about and communicating their preferences about end of life care. What would they want to happen in that kind of circumstance? If I can, so you could specify things like if I cannot, I don't know, if I cannot eat on my own without the use of a feeding tube, I don't wish to be in that position. Or if my vital functions do not continue to function without a lung machine or a heart machine, I mean, that you could specify to remove that type of care. And so this gives you the choice of how you would like to be treated if you were to end up in a state where you could no longer communicate. And the idea of advanced care planning is that it will really help those who are in the position to have to make those kinds of decisions. Family members and loved ones in particular. You can kind of ease their painful decision making process by having a living will created that specifies your particular preferences. All 50 states accept an advance directive, such as a living will. A living will is one example of an advance directive, where you specify your wishes. So it is a choice in how you want to live and how you want to die if you reach a severe condition where normal life is no longer possible. So the living will is a legal document that reflects the patient's advanced care planning. And so once again, it specifies things such as what type of life preserving care you wish for, which machines you'd be willing to be on, and things like that. How long should you be on a machine without showing brain activity? I mean, you can specify you would want to be taken off after 30 days, for instance. So the living will has advanced directives. So you've made the directives or advanced directives for if I end up in a certain circumstance. And as it says here, it indicates whether life-sustaining procedures should or should not be used to prolong an individual's life when death is imminent. This type of advanced directive or making a living will that has advanced directives in it must be signed when an individual is able to think clearly. So it cannot be made by a relative. This is not something that somebody else can do for you. You have to do it while you are of sound mind, and it must be signed by the individual themselves. Euthanasia is the act of painlessly ending the lives of individuals suffering from incurable diseases or severe disabilities. There are different types, such as passive euthanasia. In this case, treatment is withheld. So you may withdraw, for instance, a life-sustaining device like a respirator or a heart-lung machine, and then the person would die once that machinery is removed. So no one is actively killing that individual with passive euthanasia. They're just withholding, machinery that could keep them alive. One famous example from New York is the Terri Schiavo case. Terri Schiavo was spent 15 years in a vegetative state, and there were multiple court cases to argue for whether or not she should be allowed to die, and whether life-saving treatment could be withdrawn. Eventually, her feeding tube was removed, and she did eventually succumb to death. It was a very contentious case. When I say her feeding tube was removed, it happened more than once. It was removed, and then there was a new court ruling, and then the feeding tube was put back, and then, it went through a number of different stages, and it was, I'm sure, very extremely agonizing for all family members and loved ones to go through that. If I'm sure if she had had some kind of living will with advanced directives, and it would have really, once again, eased the suffering of her loved ones having to make these choices and actually argue for different treatment plans in a court setting. So once again, 15 years in a vegetative state. Active euthanasia is deliberately inducing death. So an example would be giving a lethal dose of a drug to a patient that causes them to die. Assisted suicide is kind of like a type of active euthanasia. However, the patient, in this case, self-administers some kind of lethal medication, and they themselves determine when they're going to do it, where they're going to do it. The physician just helps them to prepare the drug and to make it ready, and to give, and instructs them on how to use it. One famous case here is the Jack Kevorkian case. He was a Michigan physician who really believed in doctor-assisted suicide, and made videos of some of his patients that committed suicide with his help. So once again, he acted as an assistant and a director, giving the patient the drug to administer themselves. So there's a lot of argument. The physician didn't actually kill the patient; they just helped them get to a point of doing it themselves. This is legal in certain areas. Belgium, for instance, and Canada, it's legal in. Finland's another country, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, Switzerland. Also, half a dozen states: California, Colorado, Montana, Oregon, Vermont, Washington State, as well as Washington, D.C. So in these areas, it is legal. In others, it's not. Jack Kevorkian was pushing for it to be legalized throughout the country of the U.S. and so he did practice assisted suicide even in states where it was not legal. He eventually had to serve 8 years in prison for a second-degree murder charge. Death as it says in America here, is lonely, prolonged, and painful. Uh, Many people have pushed for um, a better, more dignified approach to death in the U.S. Um, One study, for instance, found that 61% of dying patients were in pain in the last year of their life. So it's they say it's too often that death is prolonged, painful, and lonely in the U.S. A good death involves physical comfort, support from loved ones, acceptance and appropriate medical care, and this is what many people are pushing for. That we allow more good deaths. And just to backtrack, I mean, this is kind of what Jack Kevorkian was pushing for. Deciding yourself when to die, having death with dignity rather than withering away in a painful illness. If in our hospital system, I mean, it is the hospital's job to cure illness and to prolong life. And that is kind of the first priority of doctors and hospitals, to keep people alive and prolong their lives. And so this idea is, maybe we need to get past that particular idea, and to at some point say, it would be good to help others to die with dignity. And this is of course where hospice comes in, a program committed to making the end of life as free from pain, anxiety, and depression as possible. It has an emphasis on palliative care, which reduces pain and suffering, but also not only that, but also helps individuals die with dignity. So this type of care includes not only making the patient comfortable, but also, showing an interest in them as a person, showing an interest in their family, helping their family cope with this individual's dying and eventually their death. It is really more than anything else about death with dignity and death in the nicest surroundings and best possible manner, rather than being hooked up to machines and then people working hard to give you one extra week or one extra month of life. Okay, and that concludes the first section of chapter 17.